Hi, good morning, almost afternoon, everyone. I'm Nilu Howe. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at RSA, and I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to introduce this track to the audience today. The news today is dominated by acrimonious fights between the technology community and the national security policy community. Yet we all know that our best chance for success as a society is if we can marry the best of the two worlds and what they have to offer to come up with the security solutions that protect our society, our people, our organizations, our corporations, and our privacy in a way that's consistent with our shared values. And that obligation rests on all of us, not just the US government, not just the technologists, not just the innovators, but all of us, jointly. And here today, joining us on stage, are going to be two people who are emblematic of the best that the tech, of these two worlds, the highest ranks of the US government and the highest ranks of the technology community. Ted Schlein is a general partner at Kleiner Perkins. I've known Ted for over a decade. He's one of the most accomplished, interesting, and innovative investors in the security community, and one of the few who's actually effectively crossed the divide between the Valley and Washington, D.C. Ted has a storied career as an operator, investor, advisor in the cybersecurity field. He understands and he cares deeply about the issues of our time and the importance of bridging the divide between the East and the West, between the Valley and Washington, between technology and national security policy. Dr. Ash Carter is the 25th Secretary of Defense of the United States and former Pentagon Acquisitions and Technology Chief, Harvard professor, a physicist, and a medieval scholar, which is perfect background to solve these problems. After stepping down during his last year in the Pentagon as the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Dr. Carter moved from Washington to Palo Alto, and though I'm not sure he actually remembers this, the last time we saw one another was at the Andreessen Horowitz Tech Conference just days before he was appointed to his current position. Since taking office, Dr. Carter has made numerous trips back west, met with entrepreneurs and investors, and argued hard for the US government, and especially the DoD, to learn from tech entrepreneurs about innovation, speed, and flexibility. As we think about the importance of this conversation, it's really easy for us in the technology community to think we have all the answers. It's really easy for the government to believe that it has all of the answers. But it's really about the dialogue. It's about building trust between the two communities, between the tech industry and government. And as we do that, as we look to the government as it's thinking through its policies, let's not forget the day job that Dr. Carter has. We are simultaneously fighting wars in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan. We have special operation forces at work around the world, dozens of countries. We're performing piracy operations in the Indian Ocean while dealing with a resurgent Russia in Eastern Europe. And while working on all these fronts, Dr. Carter is also working hard to transform the DoD with the latest generation technologies and systems. We can't lose fact that his day job has some pretty awesome demands as well, just like our day jobs do, a little bit different. And even with that, Dr. Carter continues to make time to come meet with entrepreneurs, innovators, and technologists, and to have the necessary conversations to determine the right policies for all of us. On our end, there's some pretty incredible institutions right here in our backyard that can help us engage in this dialogue. At Stanford University, we have the Center for International Security and Cooperation, Stanford University's hub for researchers tackling some of the most pressing national security and international cooperation issues, where Dr. Carter has long-standing ties and where he was briefly a visitor. We have the newly established EIUX, the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, whose purpose is to create lasting relationships with technology innovators in the DoD. And of course, we have In-Q-Tel, whose mandate as an investor is extended far beyond the intelligence community. Right here in our backyard, we have three easily accessible institutions that can help us engage in the dialogue we need to solve some of the most pressing problems that we face. We desperately need the bridge between our two communities. The headlines tell us that. This is the bridge. You guys are looking at them. They are two of the best people to engage in this dialogue. I am thrilled to have Ted Schlein and Dr. Ash Carter join us this afternoon.
Thank you so much. That's a great introduction. Appreciate it. Thanks.
That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me. Need we say more?
No,
I
that's
think we have
wonderful.
summed it all up.
That's as she said.
So, Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for joining us here at RSA. This is your, if I remember, this is your third trip to Silicon Valley since you've become Secretary of Defense, which is more than any Secretary of Defense in the last 20 years.
Hadn't been a Secretary of Defense to Silicon Valley in 20 years, I found out when I became Secretary of Defense, which staggered me. And anyway, I'm hastening to try to rectify that and build the bridges as.
Well, we're going to talk a lot about that because you know, your focus on this valley and its importance to the U.S., both economically and from a safety standpoint, you're very outspoken about it. I want to get into that. But before we get into that, I'd like to give everyone a little better feel of your road to being Secretary of Defense. You know, how does one become Secretary of Defense? You play a lot of Stratego and battleships growing up? You know, what?
No, it's probably like a lot of people in this. I didn't set out to do this. I was a physicist, really deeply interested in what I was doing, which was elementary particle physics, by the way. And I worked at Fermilab, Brookhaven National Laboratories, was writing papers and very happily engaged. And I wasn't really aiming at national security at all. But, and this is significant, the people who are the generation older than I in that field had all been part of the generation, well, the older of them built the bomb, but had been part of national security dating back to World War II. So it was World War II. It was a reflex on their part to have an association with national security, to take an interest in it. And they always told me that you had, because of the knowledge that you possessed of technology, you had a responsibility that came with that. And that was kind of the culture that I ultimately I took that seriously. And somebody said, come to Washington for 1 year. Just 1 year. We've all heard that too, right? Just 1 year and give this a try. It was a really important problem, a technical problem. Work on it for a year. And I felt really good about that because I thought it was a problem of great consequence. This was, by the way, where to put a big nuclear missile. This is the peak of the Cold War now. And where it couldn't be successfully attacked in a first strike by the then Soviet Union. And if you remember how all that went, the logic there was that if we could survive to retaliate, then they wouldn't attack us in the first place because we could survive to retaliate, and that was the whole deal, right? And but this was they had a lot of stuff that they could throw at us. So how do you make anything survive that kind of onslaught? That was the essence of the technical problem. And I thought this is a problem of great consequence to the world, and I have something to contribute because of what I know. So those are the two best feelings in the world, right? That you're working on an important problem and you can make a difference in that problem. Those two things came together, and so it kind of caught on with me. And I took a first job as a very junior guy, and I did that for a couple of years, working on space, nuclear command and control. Caspar Weinberger was the Secretary of Defense at the time, a long time ago, sure. And you know, I was just a young guy with big eyes. And so forth, and it caught on with me. And over time, I had various jobs. You know, the way the system works is I was an Assistant Secretary of Defense, and I was an Under-Secretary of Defense, and I was a Deputy Secretary of Defense, and now I'm the Secretary of Defense. But I love the mission. I love the place. And that's why I'm glad to have the opportunity to be here with all you who are innovators. And we can't remain the best in the world and do what we do, which is protect our country and make a better world if we are not the best. It's a competitive world out there. The only way you stay the best is innovate and having a connection. But as my mentors instilled in me, between the mission of providing security and the innovative community, the great innovative engine of America, that's real important to me.
We're going to talk about that bridge, but you are actually a byproduct of sort of a call to action that you've been putting in place in in the Pentagon of trying to get folks from the Valley and elsewhere to come to Washington, even for short periods of time. I think you have a program around this.
Yes, right? We have a number of them, but one is the Defense Digital Service for those who are interested, and it's exactly trying to recap what I did. Yeah. In other words, come in, work with us. The director of it, by the way, is here, Chris Lynch, and folks come in, no strings attached.
I mean, you don't get to be Secretary of Defense?
Well, maybe it'll lead there for people, but the point is, you don't have to become part of the government. This isn't a career thing. Come in, try it out, work on an important problem for a year or two or a project, see how you like it. And then, if you go back and do something else, that's okay. There'll always be, a little bit of awareness in your mind. Maybe you'll come back and do something another time with us. So that's an example of a people bridge between the innovative sector and the government, where people get to try us. I'd like our people to learn more about what's out here. That's one of the reasons I have this Defense Innovation Unit, experimental. By the way, it's called experimental because we're still experimenting with it. And it's going to change, and we're going to keep iterating with it. But the idea there is, and one of them is to get some of our people familiar with not just the technology, but the culture, because the government culture there's some parts of it that...
Let's talk about EIUX, because that was a major initiative that you brought forth last year and have stood up. It's at Moffett Field. Mm-hmm. How about give an update on what its mission is, what the status is, because it is a direct attempt by yourself and the Pentagon to have an interface here in Silicon Valley.
Exactly. It's a place to connect. And it is down the road. And I've given it a very open charter and said, just make connections. They'll make money connections, that is, help people to understand places in the Department of Defense where they can secure funding for ideas that they think are relevant to defense, where they can get to know the programs like I described, if they think maybe they'd like to take a year of service, a tour of duty, see what it's like. It's a place where our people can come and be and connect with all of you. And so it does lots of things, and we're still, again, experimenting with the methods and so on. But I encourage you to get to know that and all of our new activities.
How will you know if it's been successful? What's the measurement of, say, if you go out a few years and we look back on EIUX and its interface?
A couple of things. I would say, first of all, I hope that there are companies in the Valley who are doing work of consequence for national security and international security because they were introduced by, in some way, money, a meeting, technical discussion that wouldn't have been possible if there weren't a place and a facilitator for that. That's one metric I'd use. Projects that we use, money that we spend. Another one's people. So down the road there are, and I'm not saying like me, but if there are a couple of tens, couple of hundreds of people who have come in to the Department of Defense and made a big difference. Remember, you all know this from the organization, very few people, even in a huge organization like ours, can make an enormous difference. And the idea that you're a cog in the wheel isn't the spirit of the people in this room, and it's not the spirit of people we want, but you can come in and make an enormous difference. And so that would be a measure.
Okay. And this morning, I think it's this morning, you announced the Defense Innovation Advisory Board to be headed by Eric Schmidt. And it's these multiple salvos that you're firing at the Valley to embrace. And so I don't know much about it. My guess is the audience doesn't know about it.
I'll tell you, and I appreciate it, and it's very much in the spirit of what we're doing, which is to try to be innovative ourselves in how we conduct ourselves as a government and a Pentagon. I tell my people, think outside the five-sided box. Think in new ways. And I'm hoping that through what I call the Defense Innovation Board, and this is going to be some people that are the best technical minds who come in and once again spend a little time giving me some advice on how we can be more innovative. I'm so grateful to Eric Schmidt for his willingness to do things. And he's the perfect chairman for two reasons. First, he's somebody who obviously is brilliant and knows the innovative process very well and has demonstrated that. And second, he's willing to do it. He can't, well, no, I mean that. You can't take it for granted that people want to, you got a lot of things to do, that he cares so deeply about this country and about this world, and he knows that you can't have everything else. You can't have freedom, you can't have innovation, you can't take care of your families, you can't have a career if there isn't security. And so somebody's got to provide security. It's a serious business. You know, it's not a game. We know that. And he is deadly serious about it, willing to spend his time. So I'm so grateful. I'm going to let him have a substantial latitude in picking the members of the board, the other members of the board, because I want the smartest people. And then they'll travel around the world and to our bases, installations, commanders, get familiar with our problems, and tell me how we can do better ourselves. So I'm very grateful to Eric for doing this. So this is yet another way I'm trying to connect us.
There's a question, because what happens is eventually, maybe it's in January, or thereafter, there'll be another Secretary of Defense. And you're putting together some amazingly innovative initiatives that no previous Secretary of Defense has actually tried to do. How do we keep some level of persistence with these programs when there's a changeover? A lot of this happens because everyone knows it's important to you. Will it be important to the next person? Will it be funded? Because we, in the industry, build these interfaces and we start to work, whether it be EIUX or elsewhere. You want to make sure the people you're building a relationship with are going to be there and empowered in the future.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic because I think the logic is compelling. So whoever comes after me and comes after that and comes after that will, and we've been blessed. We've had a lot of really fabulous predecessors of mine, including a couple of physicists, by the way. As they think about their mission, which is to fight today's wars, you mentioned that, and we're very busy doing that, also to be thinking about tomorrow, they'll recognize that this is necessary. And I hope and I'm pretty confident, they'll say, boy, I'm glad he started these things. I'll keep them going and I'll start some more. And it'll be a reminder and a little groove that successors of mine can get in to keep us connected. So I'm very confident that it'll go on. Besides which, it's not just one person. I mean, I'm just one guy. I'm the Secretary of Defense, but there are all these people. And when we get these things going, we're imbuing this spirit in a lot more people than the Secretary of Defense himself. So the Secretary of Defense goes out and somebody else comes in, there'll still be all these other folks.
Perhaps one of the most innovative or out there initiatives that you've done thus far is also one I think you announced yesterday, which I actually think is an initiative the Russians and the Chinese already had, which is called Hack the Pentagon.
Yeah. They do.
Talk about it, because it's so cool. I mean, from our standpoint, it's such a cool idea to allow a vetted group of hackers
to attack us.
To attack.
I mean, you're right. There are black hats out there, and this is white hats, and we're trying to adopt what is a best practice. There are lots of companies that do this. And you invite people to come and attack you and find your vulnerabilities. And it's a way of kind of crowdsourcing the expertise and having access to good people rather than bad people. And you'd much rather find the vulnerabilities, and you all are experts at this, you'd much rather find the vulnerabilities in your networks in that way than by the other way, which is pilferage of information, in our case, compromise, shutdown, and so forth of our network. So we are going to have a bug bounty, first ever in the Department of Defense, and I think we'll learn something.
So you might have some of the people in the room. So are there some rules? I think one of them was you had to be a U.S. citizen. I think was one of the ones I saw.
Yeah, I mean, we do need to make sure that they're white hats, so you have to give some confidence that it's that. No, but that's pretty much it. And then there'll be the reward of having won, but also we'll have a reward also for doing this. And it's a way of using, it's an example of using best practices out there in the government. There are companies that do, they're not doing it for fun. I'm not doing it for fun. I'm doing it for utility. But it's something we wouldn't have thought of necessarily on our own. We've learned from.
But culturally, I mean, this is where I really applaud what you're doing. Culturally, for the department to sort of say, it is okay for others to tell us where we've screwed up or where something is wrong. And because we do that all the time. And startups, if startups don't realize in innovation what they've done wrong and then fix it quickly, they die. And so that to me is one of the great messages that you're trying to deliver.
I hope it is, because if you don't take risk and you're not willing to fail, then you're never going to get anywhere. And you all know that, and that's one of the things that's imbued in the innovative community out here. And we have to try to imbue our own folks with the same kind of spirit. Go out there, look, try something new. We can't just keep doing what we're doing because the world changes too fast. Our competitors change too fast. So it's a serious matter for us to remain open. And government does tend to be closed. The defense establishment especially just tends to be closed. And we have important reasons for doing some things secretly and so forth, but by and large, I think the more open we are, the more connected we are to the innovative community, the better we'll be at doing what our mission is.
Okay. Well, let's switch tacks here for a second. And Nilu, in her introduction to us, talked about the East-West divide, and our friends in China will be happy to know we're talking about the East Coast and the West Coast, I think, in this conversation. You know, as a group of technologists, we used to pride ourselves on sort of being above the political fray. We're going to deliver innovation, and people just buy it and use it, and, you know, Washington, just stay out of our hair. I know you are. I am being asked pretty much every hour of the day right now about the Apple encryption case, and what that means with the FBI legally. How is that going to affect us at the end of the day? And you know, I know there's different people might have their version of what the right answer is per se, but how does this start to work itself out so that it doesn't become what we get fixated and we dig our trenches and it's, you know.
I so agree with your overall approach, and the specific case, I can't really get into it. It's in litigation. It's a law enforcement matter. It's not a defense matter. But I can't. I mean, but the general point is right on. I think first of all that that is now just speaking for the Department of Defense, data security, including encryption, is absolutely essential to us. None of our stuff works unless it's connected. There's no point in my buying all these planes and ships and tanks and having soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines if I can't connect them. And so data security is an absolute necessity for us. So we're foursquare behind strong data security, including strong encryption, no question about it.
Backdoors?
And there are big, let me get to that also. Well, I mean, just to cut to the chase on, I'm not a believer in backdoors or a single technical approach to what is a complex and complicated problem. I'm just not. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's technically accurate. And the reality is that that the problems of data security are many, as you know. It depends on data where, data in motion, data at rest, data here, data there. And so there are lots of different parts to this. And there isn't going to be one answer. I don't think we ought to let one case drive a general conclusion or solution. And the only way we're going to get to a good solution is by working together. That's the real answer to your question. We have to work together to work our way through these problems. Let me put it this way. It's not like there's something out there that we just have to pick. We have to innovate our way to a sensible result for data security in all of these areas. And we need to do that because you can easily think of what the alternatives to a sensible collaborative approach are. One is a law written by people who won't have the technical knowledge of people in this room, may be written in an atmosphere of anger or grief, and that's not likely to be the right answer. Another alternative, which I don't like, is that the solution is written by another country, like Russia or China. You know what their attitudes towards data freedom and data access are, as well as data security. So it's much better if we do it together. That's the path I think we need to be on. Let's be collaborative, let's be technical, let's recognize that this is not one case and one problem, it's many, and innovate our way together to the answers.
You don't think then we end up in some defined legislation, call it the You Must Help the Government Terrorism Act of 2016, it's much more specific and defined?
I'd say we're not in the executive branch seeking legislation of that kind. I think we know that it's more complicated than that. It'd be better to work this out rather than have a law written. But that's a very real prospect if people are concerned about the underlying issue, no question about it. But I don't think writing a law without a real technical exploration of all the innovative solutions to these issues is really the right way to go. And so I hope we can get underway in collaboration and get things in a more sort of technical and professional track.
Right. It seemed like all parties would have been better served if this had never become a big public fiasco.
Well, again, one case shouldn't drive a whole subject.
Here's a tangential comment around this. Why are consumers seem to be more okay with Google and Facebook having large amounts of information, but when it comes to the government, we end up with a different, there's a, I don't know if I'd call it I don't know if lack of trust is it, but there's an unknowingness what's going to happen, and it raises everyone's temperature.
Sure. No, I understand. It's a good question, and people can wonder that on their own behalf. Looked at from the government side, I mean, I regard us as having a solemn trust to the people we represent, the people who pay us. So we're not anybody else. We are the government. And so it's fair that people hold us to a very high standard. I don't have any problem with that at all. And that since as the government you have powers over people, law enforcement powers and so forth, it's important that information be used in a lawful and appropriate way. So it is puzzling to me as a psychological thing, as you say. At the same time, if you say, well, what's the difference between you and Facebook? I know the difference between me and Facebook. I'm the government. I'm not that anything about Facebook, but I have to, I work for you, and I need to conduct myself in a way that is compatible with your interests. And my job is to protect our people. And I need to do that in a way that is compatible with the values that they have. So that's just a different standard, and I'm okay with that. I know there's a difference.
Yeah, it seems to me that we would serve ourselves well if over the the next bunch of years, we figure out a way to also continue to bridge that trust so that more information sharing can happen, because I think information sharing is going to be critical to our national defense and national security. So last week, you started talking about the U.S. Cyber Command using offensive cyber weaponry to batter ISIL. I'd love it if you could tell us what our goals were with using cyber weaponry in this particular case or in general. Sure. And then I'm also curious why it was so public.
Well, I'm not going to be very public about the details of it. Yeah. So we have been public about the fact of what we're doing and some of the kinds of things we're doing, and they're this. Well, we must, but we're going to defeat ISIL. No question about it. And I'm looking for all the ways we can accelerate that defeat. What does that defeat mean, by the way? We've got to defeat it first in Iraq and Syria. That's where it sprang from. I use a cancer metaphor. I say that's where the parent tumor of ISIL arose, and we need to defeat it there. But it spreads elsewhere. There are other places in Africa, showing up in Afghanistan. There are even people in Europe and the United States who are involved in various degrees. And we need to combat it, and we will, and we'll defeat it in all of those domains. But I want to accelerate that process, and we've got lots of tools that we're using to do that. We have people on the ground who are assisting local forces to take back their towns and their cities from these awful guys. We have an air campaign going on. So we're doing lots of things, but one of the things that we are doing is using cyber to interrupt their ability to command and control their forces, to make them doubt the reliability of their communications, take away their ability to control the local populace. Now, these are things that have been done in war for a long time, right? People have attacked kinetically with bombs, other people's command and controls, enemies' command and control system. We've long used radio frequency ways of doing this, jamming radars, for example. Now, because enemies use cyber, that's another way that we can accomplish our objective. But in this case, it's the defeat of ISIL, and it's a very effective tool at shutting down their ability to organize their forces and to repress the people on whose territory they're occupying. So we are going to do it. We're not going to talk about exactly how we're doing it, when we're doing it, and in what manner, but that's the basic idea, and Cybercom is our responsible combatant commander.
People may or may not know that the U.S. Cyber Command is inside the NSA.
Is alongside the NSA.
Alongside the NSA. And could you envision a time where cyber warfare is so pervasive as to how we protect ourselves that it sits alongside of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force as a military branch? Much like the Air Force started not as a military branch and then as a support service and became a major, so that there's literally a secretary that's reporting to you on that?
We're not on that road right now, and I'll tell you why, but sure, I can imagine that in the future. And just to unpack what you said, the key there is what kind of cyber force are we going to have in the future? And that's a very good question. I'm not sure, by the way, how much of it's going to be a uniformed force.
Right.
How much is going to be a civilian force?
Right.
How much is going to be a contractor force? So we need to imagine what the appropriate force of the future is, and it's not necessarily a traditional military organization like the other services. That's one thing I'd say. The other thing is that right now we do manage Cybercom, which is a military combatant command, reports to me. The chain of command is from the combatant commander to the Secretary of Defense to the President of the United States. That is our military chain of command. It's in Title 10. the U.S. code, and that's the way it is, and that's good. But we do at the moment have the same person running the National Security Agency, which is a field agency that I manage also, that's part of the Department of Defense. Now, what's the logic of having those two sit next to each other? Well, you can imagine them being separated. One could be on the West Coast, one could be on the East Coast. My real difficulty is I don't have, it's like everybody else here, I don't have enough good people to put them in different batches. So the fact that NSA and Cybercom are nearby means they can help one another, and really talented people we can assign, cross-assign, and that's very valuable to us. So sometime in the future, maybe I'd have the luxury of being able to bureaucratically separate, but for right now, keeping them together makes good sense.
Okay. The issue of offensive cyber and the use of offensive cyber, obviously by the private sector, it's illegal.
Sure.
And something that I've been disturbed by, especially in the last year, is when you have breaches done in private organizations by nation states.
Yeah.
And then lawsuits ensue where these companies are being held liable, maybe, working their way through the courts, for not being able to protect themselves against nation states. You know, it's hard enough, as you well know, to just protect the DoD networks against, let's say, China in particular, let alone any given private organization to protect themselves. Should some level of offensive help be afforded to the private sector, obviously via the right vehicles? I mean, how, or is this just going to be purely you reforming tort law, or how will we?
We do have, and you talk about Cybercom. Cybercom has 3 missions. One is to defend our networks. I said that's job 1. Yeah. Defend our, meaning DoD's networks. Job 2 is to help our companies, our economy, our critical infrastructure to protect itself. Now we do that, that's not entirely a DoD thing, so we're trying to helping others to help those companies. And the last is to use offensive cyber and be prepared to use offensive cyber. But as we think about other nation states doing damage, I mean, first and foremost, that's another reason for the necessity of this kind of coming together and all the people who are here. Data security is an absolute necessity. So first of all, we have to help our companies harden themselves. There is another side to it, though, and I don't want to go into it too much, but other countries are on notice that an attack on the United States is an attack on the United States. And I don't care whether you do with a keyboard or a bomb, an attack on the country is an attack on the country. That's our interpretation. That's the instructions we're under. So it's a serious business. Now, sometimes there are problems with attribution and that kind of thing. And I think it's fair to say the world is feeling its way along about cyber as a foreign policy and national security issue. But for me, in this job, protecting our networks, but also helping to protect our country from attack. An attack is an attack. So
potentially a good offense might be our best defense.
And we've acknowledged that we are prepared to do that. Great. It's part of Cybercom's mission.
A topic that we haven't talked about yet, you unfortunately had to sit and listen to me for a whole dinner on this topic, has to do with procurement and acquisition. Yeah, and you know, in the audience, you have a lot of entrepreneurs that have companies, or they're part of other companies that would love to sell technology into the Department of Defense and elsewhere in the government. And the procurement and acquisition rules, which I know you are very familiar with, are so hard to deal with, to allow that to happen, so that the best and the greatest innovation doesn't end up necessarily, at least in a timely manner, in the hands of who we really want to have it.
Well, I'm just completely intolerant of that as an excuse. We can't do things that way. And so my acquisition executives, and the reason I have done all these things that you started at the beginning, is to make it not impossible for people to work with the government, to find some tunnels that go through this wall between East and West, this wall between government and the private sector, to dig those tunnels so that people like Ash Carter, years ago, get a chance to go back and forth, but ideas get a chance, and money gets a chance to go back and forth. Now, yes, it's the taxpayers' money. We understand that, and therefore, it's like everything else. We have to conduct ourselves in a way that you will think is proper, since it's your money. But that doesn't mean we have to be slow. That doesn't mean we have to be bureaucratic. That doesn't mean we have to be ponderous. Doesn't that mean that we have to come out and tell you exactly what it is we want you to do, rather than give you a chance to be innovative. So I recognize, Ted, I look at these as not insurmountable obstacles. I look at them as obstacles that have to be surmounted. And we can do that, and we've shown we can do it in particular places. I'll give you an example. I think DARPA's pretty good at giving out money and connecting to the innovative. And DARPA's been around for a long time, and it stays fresh mostly because it has really great people. I've been talking recently about a place I set up called the Strategic Capabilities Office, which was essentially built around one smart guy. So, and the story of this is I happened to spot this guy, a very smart guy. In the course of him, he was giving a briefing on something else, and I said, wow, this guy really knows what he's doing. And so I said, why don't you go aside and start working on some problems here and see what you find? And he found solution after solution after solution. All of our service chiefs, our Joint Chiefs of Staff, love the guy because he's providing real solutions to them. So there are ways that you can be an exception to what I know is the rule of the government is ponderous. But I'm just telling you, we can't have that. So I don't accept that. I recognize it as a barrier. I was acquisition executive, but we have to do better, and we can find ways of doing better. That's why, and as we connect out here, I'm pressing our people to change the way they do things. At the same time, they think about how technology can change their mission.
So is it fair then for this group to assume that they should be able to do
Yes.
3-month pilots, 6-month sales cycles, purchase order,
Yes.
and work
Yeah.
in a...
Yeah, there are ways to do that, and we're going to find more. Actually, by the way, this precise question was one of the many things I happened to discuss with Eric Schmidt this morning. We were talking about the Defense Innovation Board. So one of the things the Defense Innovation Board is going to do for me is identify, invent those methods that allow us to become more agile. And to show we can do it, I'll give you some examples. When I was acquisition executive, yes, we had all these slow, ponderous programs. We also had 2 wars going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that's no kidding stuff. And so you can't give a general the answer that you'll get around to it in 2 years, but you've got a contracting process. I mean, you can't, people's lives and victory are at stake. And so we found in inventing, I don't know that you know about the MRAP vehicle, the special armored vehicle that saves so many lives. Well, that we had to sort of take out of the normal system and put it on a special fast track. And we did. And we delivered thousands of them to Afghanistan, of all places, which is really a very forbidding place to get to logistically. All these armored vehicles, from idea to fielded delivery, thousands of vehicles to Afghanistan, that whole thing was 18 months. All of them fielded. And fielded means, soldiers and Marines trained to drive them. So we can do it. And I think that what you have to feel is the tempo that you all feel, competitive tempo, which is we're not at war every day with everybody around the world, but everybody who could be an enemy, you have to look at them and say, if there were a dust up with that country tomorrow, what should I be doing today to make sure that the United States wins? And they don't. We have to think that way about everything. And
so one final question I have for you before we wrap up is, you've put forth a budget of $583 billion, I believe is the number, which is actually larger than Uber's last private valuation. So it's a big number. It's a big number. of which I think 72 billion-ish are for R&D.
Right.
And so they're just big numbers.
Yeah.
One could be super impressed by the number because it's, it'll get spent, assuming it gets approved, it'll get spent. But I actually want to move you into the mind of, in Silicon Valley, a lot of times we use capital as a way to restrict priorities and kind of move forward innovation and encourage entrepreneurship because you can't afford to waste. And so my question isn't so much, because the numbers you deal with are so astronomical for any of us to get our heads around, honestly, is there an idea that maybe too much money might not lead to the innovation that you want? That it doesn't cause have to make the trade-offs that we do and that drive a lot of how we execute.
I understand what you're saying, and that's a problem in any project or program that's given a budget and comes to expect a certain budget. And that's why in our programs, one of the things we need to do is challenge people what have you done? And not make them believe that this is just an infinite stream of funding. And the other thought that occurs, Ted, in response to your question is this. That's a lot of money to ask for the taxpayer for. I believe, and I'm absolutely certain we need it to do what we need to do to protect our country. However, I know that I can't ask for that much money with a straight face unless I can also prove to people that we make good use of it. And I know that there are places where we don't. We have too many bases, too much infrastructure. I can't get authority to close them. That's excess that I know I'm carrying. We have acquisition programs that aren't managed properly and that run over cost and so forth. So I think we have to be very hawkish on the question of reform at the same time that we're strong on the principle of innovation. And the two kind of go together, because really good innovation is economical and parsimonious and lean.
Okay. I'd love to give you the opportunity to give the audience any call to action that you'd like to deliver. It's this, the ability we have to work together. We know we have to work together. We cannot allow today's issues to disrupt our ability. It's a symbiotic relationship, always has been a symbiotic relationship. This valley was created by a lot of technology that came from Washington and a lot of those research dollars. And we understand our role, both from a national security as well as an economic standpoint for this country. And here's a group of people, as well as others out there, that I think at the root would love to do something on behalf of the country. What would you ask for?
Well, first of all, I very much appreciate the interest. I sense that, not just in this room, but people out here and people in the innovative sector are where they are because they like to do things that matter and that are consequence and that way. This and what the mission of my Department of Defense is a very consequential thing. So if you've taken an interest in it and it's sparked an interest in it, thank you. Reach out to us. Be a part of and whether you're looking at our problems and offering us a solution, whether you're offering your own commitment for a year, 6 months, we have lots of avenues for you to connect with us that you probably haven't thought of. And we're trying to think more about every day. And look for them, and I'll help you look for them. And that's what all the things that I talked about, the EIUX and so on, is supposed to be exactly that kind of switchboard. And the last is, recognize that I'm determined that we meet you halfway, that this be a real dialogue and a real connection. I know we need to look ourselves in the mirror and become more innovative ourselves. So I promise you that if you take a step, we'll take a step back in the other direction. We know that we need, when you build a bridge and you start to cross that bridge, both sides need to start walking over. And I'm committed to doing that on behalf of the government. And after all, we are you. You pay us. We represent you, and our job is to protect you, and we'd love to have your help.
Well, Mr. Secretary, we can and will overcome this public discourse that's going on today. The Valley and Washington, I think, are inextricably linked. You know, really appreciate you coming out to Silicon Valley, spending the time with this group at RSA. Thank you very much. Thank you for everything you do for this country.
Thank you, Ted. And thank all of you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Awesome. Great job.